It's Friday, and it's time for the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at the Underworld Oracle number 5 from April of 1978. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on Fanzine Friday, I take a fanzine off the shelf for a closer look. This week, that's the Underworld Oracle, number 5, from March-April 1978 by Lou Nisbet. Fanzines, if you don't know, magazines made by fans for fans of a particular hobby. In our case, that's role-playing games with a focus on Dungeons & Dragons. Issue number 5 is a great one. We hope you'll enjoy today's video. Okay, as we do each week, we're going to take a look at a fanzine from my collection. This week, it's the Underworld Oracle, number 5. The cover is pink, heavy stock, paper folded in half, 2 staples through the middle. Let's look at the cover. This is by Phil Alexander. I think by now, if you've been watching the videos, he has a very particular style of art. You can really recognize his illustrations. This one I think ties into the Halls of Testing, which is for Thieves and Assassins this month, or this issue. And I think here you see the guy sneaking in. The guy in the front looks like he's holding a gem that's on fire, so maybe he's a magician. Though it does look like he might have armor, sort of dressed like a merchant. He's got a scroll here in his hands. So anyway, just a cool piece of vintage art. The editorial page, they apologize for the delay, although that wasn't apparent, at least from the dating, that the old one was slow. And they also said they didn't think episode or issue 4 was particularly good, although I quite liked it, having 2 different dungeons, the first of which, called the Corner of the Dungeon adventure, I thought was really, really good. But in any event, he's advising the price is going up a little bit. They're going to honor subscriptions that have been paid, and they promise they'll try to do a better job of getting on time and giving people good content. He also says he thinks that they're going to phase out the Halls of Testing. I'm not sure why. I thought it was kind of a creative and very unique idea that they'd come up with. I see some practical challenges, obviously, having an adventure that's only for one class. If you had a party of 6 people that got together, they're going to be pretty bored if you decide to do the Hall of Testing during that session. But I thought, obviously, you would just do that one-on-one somehow with somebody. Okay, here's the table of contents. The editorial page, Illusion Forge, which is their version of new magic items, then new monsters. An article called On the Rack, where they talk about various means of torture in real life from history and how that might show up in your campaign. I think that's a horrible idea. I would never introduce role-playing through torturing, either players being tortured or them torturing other people. We sort of gloss right across the extraction of information from people and jump right to what they get, because I'm not role-playing through that. But I guess he thought it was interesting to talk about. Halls of Testing. This is the adventure that's set up for a particular class, in this case at Thieves and Assassins. And then the play test where they talk about that. A second review of Chivalry and Sorcery. He says we've had a chance to play it now, and so they got more feedback. Essentially, Chivalry and Sorcery, one thing you could say about it compared to traditional Dungeons & Dragons, it's much more realistic. It's set in medieval times. His comments are the realism of that game makes the fantasy elements like goblins and dragons seem a little more unrealistic somehow. Combat quite complex as well compared to traditional D&D, but at the same time it gives you more realism, so whatever people prefer maybe in that. The DM's Forum, which are some insights we're going to talk about because I thought it was particularly interesting. It's a real insight to how people played the game back in 1978, and you're going to, I think, get some surprises of things you wouldn't even have thought of as ways to play or ideas around playing D&D. And then the contacts, that's the list of people who are interested in meeting up in different cities. And then they do also have a list of fanzines, and we're going to talk about those when we get there. Here's our contributors for this month. Lou and Phil, of course, the ones who really are responsible for the magazine. Aly Morrison, who they say in here, I haven't mentioned this before, is the one who typically is responsible for drawing the dungeons. Ian Beckingham, John Gruson, they both contribute monsters to this issue. I'm not sure what David Wood does. I'll probably see it when I get to it. Oh, this is what he does. He's part of Illusion Forge. So a lot of really great magic items here. I'm not going to talk about all of them specifically. They've got 2 types of gauntlets, one for chaos and one for law. I like that idea. I like these kind of magic items that are usable by a particular class or particular alignment, so that maybe the characters can't use it at all, which I think would be pretty, realistic. Or maybe there's a bad consequence if you're lawful and you decide to keep using this chaotic themed item, right? Maybe it affects your alignment. I think that makes for some fun role play opportunities. A number of different types of cloaks, including, and I like this as well, good cloaks and then cloaks that look like the good cloak but they're really cursed. So you've got a cloak of feathers that can let you fly for a certain period every day. You've got another pair that lets you fly unless you get into a fight, in which case then the wings fly you away from the fight. They've got one that lets you polymorph into another creature, which is really cool for a short period of time. You get healed when you change back. Then there's another one that looks like that, but on a random roll by the DM, you may actually get stuck in that position, or you may polymorph into something you didn't want. The DM gets to choose to make it sort of interesting in the game, I guess. So those are really great. And then several types of torches. You've got a torch you can throw down the hall and it'll come back to you. You've got a torch that won't go out. You've got a torch that burns like a ethylene torch, you can burn through stuff with it. It'll burn super hot. And then you've got an ethereal torch, which the light is on a different plane, so it's not hot and it can't get put out by water. So those are both pretty cool. And then you have this thing called an Aeolus, which I think is a Greek god of the winds, but it's the editor suggests these should be for bards only. They're reeds you can blow through that have particular magical effects, create gusts of wind, increasingly strong, that can do damage or blow things away. Some that can summon elementals, and one that'll put out a bunch of smoke and sort of cloud someone's vision. And the last one, which will create a fireball, which is pretty exciting, which they say will including blow up on the person that cast it if they're not careful about where they're facing when they blow it. And of course, you wouldn't know any of those things, right? You would blow if you tried them without getting an identify spell. They could be lots of fun that way. A few keys. They've got a skeleton key which I really like this idea. We talked about this in a different issue. These ideas of a tool that gives a thief a bonus to a particular skill set. And the skeleton key obviously helps you a 10% bonus on open locks. Then they've got one that will jam whatever you put it in. It looks like a skeleton key, but you put it in, it can jam. It can get stuck. It can do it at really inopportune times, right? Like you're trying to get through a door to get away from a monster, or you're trying to lock the door to keep a monster out. And it says, it can go bad either way. And then following up on the torches, we've got some cool lanterns. One that'll shoot out a strong flame that'll have the effect of a fireball, much weaker, but and the further you go, the weaker it gets, but you can sort of do some damage at a distance from your lantern. One that lets you, the light from the lantern lets you see invisible creatures. One that has an effect that takes, the light has an effect whenever you're near danger. So that's kind of cool, I think. And one that never burns out. And then they've got this armor, they call it prismatic armor. I like the concept. It's a little challenging. What it's saying is it has a particular protection that goes with it. If somebody hits your armor, like physical monster attack or a weapon attack, there's certain ill effect that would happen to them. It might be damage, they might fight worse, they might be paralyzed, shocked, and again, some of these things are really powerful. One of the options is an attacker is instantly killed. And then they have this totally random thing that can be cast against the armor that will cause it to disintegrate. And that's sort of weird. And it's random spells, meteor swarm, dimension door, ice storm, magic missile, disintegrate, power word kill. And how anyone would ever know any of that, I have no idea. I guess maybe it's to have it randomly happen during the course of an adventure. And if they cast that spell, the armor powers are negated, and the wearer takes 90 points of damage. I guess it doesn't disintegrate. I guess it just becomes normal plate mail for the next 24 hours. Way too powerful. a little too much in ways, but very good kernel of ideas. I like these ideas a lot. You got this illustration down here, this guy wielding a cross. I don't know that I would do with that iconography, but I like the idea of a weapon, especially a cleric's blunt weapon, that will flame on, and this flames on whenever it gets near undead. They get increased levels for their turning ability. They suggest 3, but you do whatever you want there. And if a good paladin, druid, or monk is holding this weapon, it says they gain the level, like 3rd level ability to turn undead. So some interesting options. And then there's a real fun one here at the end, the Fearful Lantern, which goes out whenever you get near danger to leave you in complete darkness. Okay, new monster. So great magic items. One of the things I love about all these old fanzines. So I know that took a little while, and now we're going to talk about monsters. Another one of the things I think you can never have too many of. These are some really good ones. All right, so Phil Alexander has the first one. I like it a lot. It's called the Stone Belly. It says it's like a cousin, or of the gelatinous cube. Armor class is 9. Hit dice 25. So huge, hard to kill, but really easy to hit. And they say that the way it's adapted in the dungeons to survive, it's called a Stone Belly. It forms itself into the shape of the room. So it basically presses up against all the walls and creates an opening where the door is. You walk in, it'll close that off, and now you're inside the creature, and then it just starts releasing essentially the stomach acid that starts dissolving you. And again, it is easy to hit, but you're taking damage every round automatically from the acid, and you got to get through 25 hit dice to get out of this thing before you get dissolved. So low-level adventurers are going to get killed probably, right? So it's a pretty potent. So you might temper it, but I like it. It's a clever concept. The next one is the Wern. Ian Beckingham gives us this one. It's the drawing at the bottom, which is like this giant maggot, and its thing is this. It's got a little sharp beak at the front, and it hits you. It says it'll penetrate through armor, and then it starts pumping eggs into you until you get it off of you, or you have to basically attack and break the beak to get the little beak thing out, and it has. It'll pump these eggs into you every round, and those eggs are doing damage to you. And then, of course, if you don't know and you don't get rid of them, then those eggs are going to come out nasty, but kind of good. All right, so John Gruson has 2 floating creatures. One is called a Soul Sucker, and he said it's a 3-foot diameter ball of red light. When it makes an attack, if it hits, you lose intelligence. It doesn't say how much. So I don't know if I'd do 1 point per attack. Probably fairly nice. I might do a roll like D3 or D4 intelligence points per attack. You get a save versus death ray. If not, you lose intelligence. And when you get to 0, you die and you become a soul sucker. The other thing he has is a glowing ball of green, sickly green light called the Fetch. And when this thing does, it tries to hit you. That means it's put its light bulb around your head. And then you get a save versus magic, and if not, it will cause your character to go insane. You got 1d6 turns to get either a limited wish or a remove curse to cure you of this, or you die. So it's pretty extreme. And how you would know how to fix yourself from that insanity, I don't know, but that's what the Fetch does. Marshwalkers, they say, are basically a type of goblin that live on swamps, and they've created these big bags of air that they tie around their back. That's what the illustration is, and there's a little one in the back. You can't really tell. It's a little goblin. He has 3 little balloon bags, and they use this air that helps them float, and that way they can walk and stay on top of the water as they move around the swamp. So there's no footsteps. You can't, they don't leave any trace when they move around, and otherwise they're just little goblins, and they attack you with javelins or whatever, like a normal goblin. But of course, you could end up stuck in the swamp, right, if you get in a battle with them. And then they have a giant antlion, which is just a creature from nature made huge. You're out in a terrain. It'll have basically a conical shaped hole, and if you accidentally get on it, and it'll be like sand, right, and you start to slip down in. You fail your dex check. Now you're stuck down in there flailing around. This thing will come up and chomp you and pull you further down in. And that's how it kills you. We've got these little porcupine-looking guys called shooters. exactly what you would think. They can shoot quills out at you. If they hit you, you got to save versus poison. And it has a big club, sort of like prehistoric dinosaur, right, that can thump you like a mace. Then they have a clever idea. These things are called doom birds. They're great big crow-like creatures. They're always paired up with a larger carnivore. And what they do is they've got this special thing where they can somehow do a bird dance, and people can essentially be hypnotized, and they'll follow them, and then they lead you back to the carnivore. The carnivore eats you, and then these guys, come along parasitically, and they eat the crumbs or the scraps. The Banshee, which hasn't appeared yet in the Monster Manual, and this is a different idea. This is sort of a portent. So this thing is to be used by the Dungeon Master. You'll hear it scream, and he says you roll, you the Dungeon Master, each person save versus poison for whatever reason, and the first person you get to who fails that roll, they're sort of like marked with the bad luck that the Banshee's foretelling. And so the next time that character has to make a saving throw, which could be a day, a week, a month, they automatically fail. So, and that's what the Banshee is. That's how they create the foretelling coming true. So it's just sort of like a story device. And the last one are rock men. They are men. They look like rocks. They can blend into the wall. They attack. But they can be anthropomorphic, look like people, and they can punch you with their fists. They're really strong. So that's a cool thing. They don't do anything super cool like turning you into rock or mud, but it's a cool one nonetheless. Okay, so now we have this one, and there's a lot more to this one. Assassins and Thieves. You'll see it's got the cellar, the first floor, and this one. It's got this whole sort of like exploration, sneaking, thieving thing to it, and there's a lot to this one. But again, I think these are really great adventures. They're well done, well thought out. They're a little bit different from the traditional dungeon that you would have. And again, the biggest drawback I think is hard to use in a campaign because only Thieves and Assassins can do this, right? Everybody else is just hanging out, waiting for this to be done. But it's if you like this idea, they've given us, I think, 5 of these now, I think. I like the idea. You could obviously do it on your own, change what it is, change what's in it, but the idea of having this hall of testing is a good one. Like I said, especially for me, someone's character's died, they're starting over at level 1, you want to give them a chance to earn experience and catch up. You have a one-on-one session, you do this hall of testing idea, now they're on level 2, level 3. And of course they do the play test, which is another great thing that these guys came up with. All right, so the DM forum I usually sort of just summarize, but I really wanted to talk through some of these things because it gives us insight into how people were playing the game back in 1978. So here's some ideas for new DMs, right? And he gives you 3 methods. You would never think about this. Method 1, the Dungeon Master's in charge makes all the rolls for the entire game. The players just sit over there, and this is, I think, how Gary did it at the very beginning. The players sit over there together. They have a caller, right? One person speaks for the party. Tells the DM what they're going to do. He rolls all the dice. He tells them, basically narrates whether you're, opening locks or you're fighting with monsters. He just rolls and then tells you what's happening. So it's much more of a story, and the players are much more just sort of part of the narration, right? They don't have anything to do with the determination. Number 2, he says, like, you give them the dice, which is sort of the way we would typically play. And number 3, he talks about giving people miniatures, having the drawing on the table where you can see the dungeon and you move them around. He sort of advocates against that. That's people did that early on, then they didn't do it. Now people are doing it, I think, somewhat again more so. He suggests really you don't want to do it because he says it almost becomes a board game. Players can become fixated on moving their pieces and where their pieces are, and they don't listen and think, and they don't have this sort of game in their mind that we traditionally think of with Dungeons and Dragons. So that's sort of one part of this. And then he's got some ideas which I think are clever, and of course the kind of things a new DM still today would want to know. Like one, get the information about all of your characters. He even says maybe have copies of the character sheets, but at least get information. Then he talks about having sort of like a cheat sheet or a summary that's either on a piece of paper or across the top of your DM screen where you've got like the essential things like people's name, level, armor class, hit points, and skills like for their particular weapons, or wizards, you've got written down what the mage's spells are, that kind of thing. which is a good tip. And he also talks about having a sheet where you keep track of experience points as you go so that you don't lose it. Because at least in this point in time, like characters didn't do that. Like the DM is always keeping track of all the experience points. And he also says, in particular, if you trade off from one DM to another, and they haven't gotten to the point where they actually get to utilize this XP to level up, you want to have those notes for the other DM to have in front of him or her when they sit down at the next session. Same thing, he says you should be keeping track of the money that the parties have received and the magic they've received. I think today we probably push that mostly over to players to keep track for themselves, but maybe a DM wants to do it on the other side of the DM screen as well. And then I love this one. He says don't forget to have a dead file for dead characters. He says you'll need a binder. And he goes, and you're going to want to keep good track of that. So you're going to want to start from the beginning, like with tabs, so you can alphabetize these dead characters. He's like, because you don't want to wait, until you have a bunch, and then you have to go back and organize. So be organized from the start. That's his tip. We now have, remember, it's only 1978. We have approximately 300 dead characters in my binder from my campaign. I think that's awesome. That's a great insight to how D&D in 1978 was pretty different from 2022. I think that was great. He also talks about wisdom, and I think we all struggle with this. So wisdom, he says, is the one stat at that time didn't really have any bonus for having a high number. He said, you got to fix that, right? We constantly struggle with the idea of the dead stat or the throwaway stat, and so that's what he's wrestling with here. These actually, I like these a lot, because even today, the extra spells, if you're a cleric, that's pretty good. That +2 bonus on magic saves is kind of somewhat worthless, right? So here's 2 suggestions he has. They're somewhat class specific, but one, he's starting at 14, give people a bonus on the roll versus turn undead for every point they go up. I kind of like that idea. And he said if you don't want to go with that, then give them a bonus on their healing spells, clerics or druids, right? For every point of wisdom above 14, when they roll a die, they just get to add 1 extra point, right, to how much is healed. I like that idea a lot as well. I like those ideas a lot. And I think generally, too, it speaks to looking at the bonuses you get. Like strength, everybody understands why good strength bonuses are good, right? Because you combat and everybody's going to use those. But making sure you don't end up with these throwaway stats, or at least making there be a consequence, right, for the throwaway stats. I think that's a great idea. And then he talks about what role-playing is and the idea of making sure that players are engaged. And so back to the whole 300 dead characters, he says some people don't seem to be attached to their characters at all, and so they don't even care when a character dies. They're just, whatever, give me dice, roll up again, here I come. He says you want people to be a little more invested in the character, and he encourages DMs to make sure people feel like they have some connection to their character. And he says do that by knowing where they're from and what their skill sets are, and something to do with what their aspirations would be, whether that's to build a keep and a stronghold, or have followers and build a monastery or whatever it is. He's like, make sure your characters actually have some goals they're striving towards, so there's some connection, and that'll lead them, he thinks, to maybe doing a little bit better job with role playing within the game, rather than just let me know when I can roll dice and kill something. Okay, so I just wanted to mention here, because we're talking about fanzines, the things they mentioned. They mentioned The White Dwarf, which of course is a professional magazine. Alarms and Excursions, which we've talked about before. One of the longest running ones. It's big. It's just it's a great example of what was going on historically, because that thing is still going on today, right? That's legal out in California. The Dungeoneer, which was the first fanzine group that I did, produced by Janelle Jaquays. Gold standard as far as I'm concerned. And here's some other ones. Troll Crusher, which is from the UK. We talked a little bit about that, which they say is A4 sized and is a bit of a what they call an APA Zion, which is like Alarms and Excursions, where a lot of the content is stuff people have mailed in, rather than, this is really produced by Lou and Phil. And there's some stuff they got there, but these guys pretty much put this together by themselves. Just like Janelle, pretty much her group pretty much put that thing together. Spellbound, which we mentioned, was advertised even in one of the Dungeoneer magazines. That's from New York. Quick Quincy Gazette, which you may recall Janelle Jaquays thought was just fantastic when she had seen a copy of that. And The Lords of Chaos, which they say is similar to Alarms and Excursions, but a slightly smaller version, and that's from California as well. So a few other fanzines to talk about. I have some of those, but not all of them, so now I got stuff I need to be looking for. And then here's the back cover. I just wanted to share because of the artwork there, which is the whole, they use artwork to sort of remind you that you're supposed to subscribe. And this guy's throwing down his flask and saying, I'm done drinking. It made me forget to get my subscription to the Oracle. But again, some nice Alexander art. Okay, that is it for this week. That is it for the Underworld Oracle number 5. I've got one more of those, and then we'll be doing something new. I hope you're enjoying the series. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.